Hello and welcome to the Virtual Care Basket. I'm Ayesha Hilton and I invite you to find out more at virtualcarebasket.com. I hope you enjoy this interview. Hello and welcome. I'm Ayesha Hilton and I want to welcome you to our virtual catch-up session with Janette Dalgliesh today. She's an astrologer, but foremost over that, she's a life coach, and I think that she's one of the most wise people I know. And during these tough times, I think it's really good to have a voice of reason amidst the love of the cosmos combined. So thank you, Janette, for joining us, and thank you everyone else for joining us as well.
Oh, thanks so much, Ayesha. It's so nice to be here. Hi, everyone. Yeah, wow, interesting times for all of us. And yes, you're right. My primary focus is being a life coach, but I use astrology a lot in my work, and I also write a regular weekly column on what's the sort of the events of the week coming up. And so I'm not your average, or not that any astrologer is average. In fact, an astrologer friend of mine said recently that she said she doesn't like the word astrology. She thinks it should be astrologies, plural, because every astrologer has their own unique kind of perspective and focus and way of looking at things. And because I come from this life coaching background, my focus, and I was doing that before I learned astrology. So my focus with astrology has always been, what's good about this? Like, what's the advantage here? So even with things that some other astrologers see as potentially, bleak or gloomy or catastrophic even, my first question is, what's the good thing here? Like, what's the benefit? How do I make the most of this? So I think this, sorry, Ayesha, you just spotlighted me and I'm suddenly really large in my own screen. It's like, what? Sorry, totally distracting. It's fine. Leave it there and I'll just switch to looking at my chat. No, don't apologize.
I was talking. I realized yesterday you could spotlight, because I was like, oh, how can, when people come on and then they see everyone, and I want them to see the guest more.
Sure, I get that.
Sorry. I think you can click on gallery view though.
Yes, I can. No, it was one of those moments. No, don't apologize. Seriously. I totally get why you did it, and it was just I didn't know that that's what happens when you get spotlighted. So now we've all learned something.
You're in the spotlight, my love.
Woohoo! Jazz hands.
Yeah.
So what was I saying? Yes. So with everything that's been, let me take us all back. Let's take us all back. Do the shimmery screen effect. Back in early 2019, we had the beginning of a series of really significant astrological events featuring the the slower outer planets and their movements. So, we're all familiar with the closer planets, or in astrological terms, we call them planets, and we include things like moon, but basically the heavenly bodies that we can see in the sky. So you look at moon, she travels through the zodiac in about 28 days. So she does a full cycle in 28 days. So the effect or the impact of this on us tends to be a sort of day-to-day thing. So we have 2.5 days of the moon in Virgo, and it's great for organizing things. And then we have 2.5 days of the moon in Scorpio, and suddenly we want to do some deep dives and make some transformations. So it's got this fast and not superficial exactly, but certainly it's not lingering, and it doesn't necessarily go as deep. With the outer planets, these are called the generational planets. So, because Pluto, for example, Pluto takes much longer than a human lifetime to go the full cycle of the zodiac, and stays in each sign for a really long time, a generation. So wherever Pluto sits in your chart, it's likely to sit in the same sign or the sign just next to it for everyone in your generation. So it has this kind of, when we think about those outer planets, we can think about them in societal terms as well as personal terms, in ways that the closer inner planets don't necessarily function. And for me, this sequence of events that's coming up over the next 12 months and has been started in 2019 is what's interesting to look at. So we began with Saturn-Pluto conjunction. That happened in January this year, but it began in early 2019. And with Saturn, so when we're looking at these planets, we want to think about what do they govern, what do they rule, what do they associate, what are they, what part of our psyche, if you like, do they link to? Saturn relates to our sense of purpose and life mission, the thing we came here to do, and how we make our mark on the world. And Saturn so there's a sense of there's purpose and there's ambition. There's also a sense of I want to get this done, and a sort of stoicism, knuckle down, head down, tail up, do the work, get it done. That's the Saturnian energy. It can often feel like a taskmaster, and it's one of the reasons that sometimes in our Western culture especially, we have this kind of overemphasis on productivity. That can come from this Saturn sense of you're supposed to do it properly and you've got to get it all done, and you haven't achieved enough and you're not good enough, and who do you think you are anyway? All of that can be tied up with Saturn, that Saturnian sense of this is what we need to do. And then Pluto is about deep transformation. Pluto goes into our deepest hidden layers, and Pluto is one of the gods of change. Uranus is the other one, and we'll come to him in a second. So Pluto is about deep, slow transformation. But when you get Saturn and Pluto together, which happens every 34, 35 years, it's like we are all invited to re-examine how we do things, how we make things happen, how we make our mark in the world, both personally and collectively. The one that happened in January was in the sign of Capricorn. The last time that happened was in the 16th century, and it was at around the time when Martin Luther was challenging the Catholic Church on the basis that he thought people should have a closer connection to God and not need the priest to intervene with everything. So at the time, the Catholic Church was selling indulgences. If you wanted to be forgiven for your sins, you couldn't just pray to God and say, I'm really sorry, forgive me for what I did. You had to go to the priest and pay for an indulgence. And Martin Luther thought that that was wrong. So he began Protestantism in the 16th century at around the time of the last Pluto-Saturn in Capricorn. So the nature of it is, whatever we're functioning with, personally and societally, the foundations are going to be challenged. Anything that has insubstantial foundations or is not functioning properly, not doing its job properly, it's going to get transformed. So we saw it begin to happen in 2019. We saw climate change marches happening more and more. We saw the Extinction Rebellion movement coming up. We saw challenges to how democracy works. We saw the impeachment in the US. We saw all kinds of, we saw in Australia, we had the big banking Royal Commission, which revealed a ton of irregularities that were hidden. So all kinds of stuff has been hauled out into the daylight and examined and found lacking. But we haven't completed the process. So the peak of it was in January. And it's still at play, sort of, it's waning. That influence is waning throughout 2020. But then we've got some new players or some additional things coming up. So at the moment, as we're talking, we've got Saturn about to move out of Capricorn and into Aquarius, which is a whole new energy. And then later in the year, we've got Pluto-Jupiter conjunctions happening, and that's kind of like the magician meets the wizard. It's like and the emperor. It's a kind of expansion of the transformation. And then at the end of the year, we have Jupiter and Saturn meeting in Aquarius, which is going to be revolutionary and new. So we're all of us humans, we're sort of in the middle of a moment that people will look back at this in 200 years' time and see this as a significant turning point for society as a whole. And one of the ways that we can, human brains do not like change. They like variety, but they don't like big change. It's terrifying to us because our ancestral wiring says if everything gets changed, then the tribe will die. You know, we might be attacked by lions. We don't know if this new environment will have foraging for us, etc., etc. It's not surprising that we've seen panic buying. It's because when humans feel deeply shaken about all of the things they've assumed, all the things we took for granted about how society works have been shaken up. And when things get shook up, we go back to the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm sure everyone's seen that, where, you know, you've got this pyramid. It's a very simplistic model, but it's quite effective for helping to understand that, you know, the fundamental need at the bottom of the pyramid, you have to satisfy that first, is the need for shelter and food. And then the next layer, you know, as you move up the hierarchy to at the top, you get, you know, enlightenment and humanitarianism and so on. At the moment, we're in that phase where a lot of people are desperately struggling to satisfy the feeling of being sheltered and safe. It's not about what's the reality of their situation. It's about this desperate need to reduce the dread. And for many people, that has been, they reduce their feeling of dread by stocking up on toilet paper and stocking up on food. You know, all the public health stuff has been about hygiene and be prepared for isolating for 2 weeks. What our brains are hearing and our ancestral wiring is hearing is, we're about to hit plague. If you get infected, we will lock you away and put a cross on the door and your family will starve. So between that and the sort of this focus on hygiene, it's not surprising that people have gone, that their lizard brains have kind of gone, oh my God, I must go out and fill up my resources. So the question is, why does this change feel so violent? What's like, it's not just big philosophical change or big political change, it feels so much bigger and deeper. And that's to do with my good friend Uranus. So I want to just pause and say, I feel like I've been talking at people for about, for like ages. Does anyone have questions at this point before I dive into the next bit?
So it's only about 10 minutes, so don't worry.
Oh,
that
good.
was really good. It's really good to help understand the toilet paper brain, the lizard brain. If anyone wants to ask a question, you can either unmute I've muted everyone, but feel free to unmute yourself or to comment in the chat and I can translate that out. And yeah, if you've got just any comments, not even a question, you know, it's lovely when you're presenting to hear back from the people you're talking to rather than just...
Yeah, thank you for that, Ayesha. Yeah, agreed. I mean, I always say to people, I can talk under wet cement about this stuff. So, so I'm used to kind of not necessarily waiting for people to comment.
So don't let me do that. That's good. Some people need it more. I guess for me, I've been really interested to see my own reaction. And like last night, I went to my mum's house because my stepdad was having computer problems and he teaches, tertiary education. He teaches Chinese medicine and they're all moving to online, of course. And he couldn't get his camera to work, so I had to reinstall the drivers. My mum was hysterical that I was there because my stepdad had caught the train back from Melbourne. She's spraying me. I went and washed my hands anyway, and then she's like spraying the keyboard. And she goes, "You're not taking this seriously. We're all drying. We're dropping like flies." And it's like, I said to her, she goes, and she's like reiterating that I'm not taking it seriously. I said, I am taking precautions, but I'm not going to live my life in fear. And so it's like interesting to see how some of us, we can step back from the lizard brain and see it a bit more clearly. But I still have found a bit of peaking of like every time I go to the shops, I seem to buy a loaf of bread. That's my toilet paper.
Absolutely. My mum lives in an aged care residence, and many of the people with her in the residence, probably about a third, were like she was, born in England and went through the Second World War experience there. And she said the other day she was talking to the neighbour who sits at her table for meals, a Yorkshire woman, 99-year-old Yorkshire woman, who basically said, I didn't see a banana for years. And Mum said it's been very interesting how the residents are craving bananas, and it's a direct result of their own personal lived experience of having gone through rationing, where bananas were just they just weren't seen. And it wasn't just during the war. I was born in London, and I can remember as a very, very small child going into the local shop in a village in Kent. So this wasn't urban. This wasn't an urban centre. This was, in the countryside. But they had a pineapple on sale. I'd never seen one in the flesh. I had no idea I'd seen pineapple out of tins, because we were getting tin pineapple. But this was this was in the early 1960s. So this was well after the war was over, but rationing had its effect for a really long time after the war ended, particularly for those people who were living in Europe. The Netherlands, many countries in Europe had that direct experience. And if our ancestry is from other parts of the world, there's still the impact of that experience for ourselves, our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents. And that has we carry that memory in our DNA, as well as in the stories that they told us, and occasionally in our own very, very, long ago memories. So that, together with this, the way that we have been receiving the story, it's very interesting. The media are now being very, mostly, I have to say, I tend to watch the ABC, so I don't really see the screaming headlines so much. But the media even seems to be much more toned down now than they were at the beginning of this, when it was screaming headlines, which triggered this, which always trigger the kind of lizard brain response anyway. That's what they're designed to do, is to kind of make us go, oh, what's that about? I must go and, click on that firewall, pay my subscription, or I must go and buy that newspaper or whatever. It's all part of the mix. And it is that thing where when we have the opportunity to take a deep breath, remind ourselves that actually this moment, right here and now, I am safe, and take a step back. And this is where the astrology for me is really helpful, because when I'm looking at the movement of these slower outer planets, it is the historical perspective. I mean, I don't know that this is like a watershed moment. Nothing's going to be exactly the same as it was after this is over. A bunch of things will have changed. So let me get back to the astrology, and because I want to kind of set the stage, if you will. So Saturn has been, so we had that Saturn-Pluto conjunction in around the 11th, 12th of January. That said, the foundations for everything that you are building into the future, you need to make sure they are robust. Anything with insubstantial foundations is going to implode or collapse. But it's not a threshold. It's not like a threshold moment that happens just on those two dates. These are slow moving planets, particularly Pluto. So it's a slower, it's like it has that kind of bell curve almost shape to it, where we are going to see the effects of this unfolding throughout 2020, because it doesn't really end until the end of this year. Meanwhile, we now have Saturn moving into Aquarius, which is a completely different energy. Aquarius is ruled by Uranus. So there are a couple of things we want to look at. First of all, Aquarius is about our relationship as individuals to the collective. It's about how I relate as a separate person to the rest of the collective. It's about how you, Ayesha, individuate from the collective. It's about that relationship. And it's an air sign, so it's got intellectual curiosity. So it's associated with inventiveness, innovation. It's that idea of, I go out and I find the ideas and the concepts and the knowledge, and I bring them back to the collective in a new way that the collective has never seen before. So it's like this spark of creativity, this spark of almost, if you like, a revolutionary way of doing things or being or thinking. So that's the sort of tone of Aquarius. And Uranus, the ruler of Aquarius, is this. It's like personally, it's like the leader of our own inner rebel alliance. It's completely unafraid of shaking things up and breaking old paradigms, and if necessary, shaking things up in ways that are really uncomfortable. So one of the ways I like to work with Uranus is, when Uranus has direction, when we know what we want, it's really fantastic. Uranus can break our chains, smash down the fences, burn the bridges, do whatever needs to be done to take us in the direction we want to go. If we don't know where we want to go, or if we're not admitting it to ourselves, which is actually what really happens, he's a bit of a rebel without a cause. So it can be a bit destructive because we're not focusing it in any particular direction. So Uranus is an interesting dynamic here. So we've got Saturn, which wants to do things properly, moving into this sign of which, and he's going to move into the sign, move back into Capricorn, and then move back into this sign for the next 7 years at the end of the year. So, sorry, not 7 years, 2.5 years. I get excited and I lose my place. So, but not only is Saturn moving into Aquarius, so we've got this practical planet moving into this sign of invention and creativity. That is all happening in an important aspect to Uranus himself, and Uranus is sitting in Taurus. So we've got Uranus, which is the planet of rebellion and invention, and I want to do it. I want to do it my way. We've got that planet sitting in Taurus, which is all about our relationship with ourself, between ourself and our resources. So it's mainly about our relationship with our own bodies, and it's about our relationship with the planet. So you've got Uranus in Taurus, and he will be there for a fairly long period of time. That's happening as a sort of an invitation to revolutionize our relationship with the planet. And we've already seen that happening in bucket loads. And we've got, sorry, I'm actually looking at my chart at the moment. So there's this, so the relationship that we're looking at, we've got Saturn, this very practical god, if you like, the god of logistics. Let's call him that, the god of logistics and building, sitting in this sign which is about invention and creativity, and at the same time in a sort of an edgy kind of relationship that says we better get this done. There's no slacking off with this one. We've got Uranus, the god of rebellion and shaking loose the past, in this sign that's to do with our relationship with our resources. So again, relationship with our own bodies. So it's about it's in some ways an aspect of our health, and our relationship with the planet, with the food we eat. So we're seeing all kinds of things flowing out from the current situation. We're seeing a huge challenge to the concept of globalization and how it actually operates. So Saturn's about the nitty-gritty details of how a thing operates. In the past, globalization meant you grow something locally, then you send it to another country to have it processed, and then you import it back in, and people are making profit all along the way, but actually you've got lots of air miles, and you've got workers not being paid properly, and you've got a whole bunch of other consequences. That model of globalization, it's not particularly helpful. It's not particularly healthy for the planet, and it's not particularly, Taurus is very much, Taurus wants everyone to get paid properly. Taurus wants everyone to have their resources. Taurus can see that, if people are paid properly, then they can buy the stuff. We want everybody to have money to be able to buy the stuff. Uranus comes along and says, this system's not working correctly. It's not a terrible system. We like globalization in the sense of connection. We like to be able to, I sell my work. I do what I do for my clients who live all over the world. That form of globalization is brilliant because nothing has to travel except a few electrons. Nobody is being badly paid or underpaid, and nobody is losing work, the work of their hands, to somebody on the basis of that labor is cheaper. So this is a really big shake-up for questioning the foundations of how we have done globalization in the past. That's not to say we'll find the perfect solution, but we have this opportunity with Saturn coming into Aquarius to figure out new ways to do it, to create new ideas, to be innovative. through technology. Aquarius also governs things like the internet and new technologies. So new technologies will emerge and or are already emerging around this. And this is just one aspect, this thing of globalization. We're also seeing challenges to, the countries that have prided themselves on having small government might be seeing that actually you can make it so small that nobody's there, there's no infrastructure left to deal with the crisis. So, the coronavirus first case tested on the same date in South Korea and the USA. South Korea has it completely under control, and they rolled out drive-through testing really early on. The US is still struggling to figure out how to do testing. And you can see how the relationship between the population and the government is a fundamental part of that difference in how things have unfolded. We're seeing challenges to how we receive information, how we take responsibility for doing our research. We are starting to get much savvier as a whole around things like, where do I go for information about how to manage this? And people are, instead of necessarily relying on, if you've got leadership that has really good, solid, clear information, terrific. In the places that haven't had that, Australia is one of them, people are starting to share information directly with themselves and sort of say, look, here's a good source from the World Health Organization. Here's a good source from a local group of GPs. Here's a good source from wherever. So we're starting to see a sort of testing of a whole lot of things about how we do life. Again, our brains don't love that because it is scary, and and we know that there are going to be consequences for those we love, potentially lethal consequences for those we love, for some of us. And again, taking that big step back and kind of going, okay, my dad died 10 years ago, and I learned one of the biggest blessings of that moment was I learnt to not be afraid of death anymore. So I don't know how this is going to pan out for me. I don't know how it's going to pan out for those I love. And I have had, I can tell you now, I've had sleepless nights. I'm not saying that I have, figured out how not to feel the fear, but it is more a question of going, okay, I'm feeling the fear. I'll take a deep breath and I'll take a step back, and I'll remember that we are going through this societal change, upheaval, that's coming from these two separate but powerful change agents. So we've had Pluto, and Pluto is active all year, which is this slow, deep, underground, hidden transformation that happens deep within us, deep within our psyche. And then we've got Uranus doing this shaking things loose kind of transformation. And one of the things I always tell people, if I'm looking at a client's chart and there's something significant going on with Uranus in how it's affecting them personally, what I always say to them is, start every day by setting your intention for delightful surprises. And we've had, God knows, we've had so many of those with this. We've seen dolphins in the canals of Venice, birdsong and clear air in Wuhan province, which is in Wuhan city, which is unheard of. It's an industrial town, and the sky is clear. We've had wonderful stories. Yes, we've had the panic buying, but we've also had amazing stories of kindness and generosity. We've seen people who normally expect to kind of gather in various different ways, whether it's church or, the yoga class or dance class. People are setting up ways to do those virtually online, so that there are ways, people are coming up with surprising and new ways of presenting themselves, of communicating, of communion with their social groups and their sort of work-oriented groups. There's a wonderful story I saw on the news the other night about a dance studio in New York, which has set up so that all of the people who'd paid to come and do class have been given information about how to create a space where they can do it at home. and the people who run the classes are doing it in the studio, but they're designing choreography which allows them to do dance that takes up a very small area instead of what they would normally work with, which is the size of a studio. So it's been, you know, humans, we are these incredibly resourceful creatures. We are resilient and resourceful more than we think we are. And I think the astrology, understanding that this is, you know, the astrology doesn't do things to us. It's more like weather. It's the energy that influences how we, the energy that's around us. So we have this opportunity to tap into our resilience, tap into our resourcefulness, and perhaps spend a little time thinking about how we would like things to be after all of this is over. Maybe we would like to see, you know, we know, for example, with all the flights closing, international flights closing, we don't have to worry about whether the oranges we're buying have massive food miles on, have air miles on them. We know that we're likely to be eating food that's more seasonal. We're getting, which gives us the opportunity to help our bodies tap into the idea of seasonality. As transport gets lessened and lessened, we won't be seeing large quantities of tropical fruit in the middle of winter that's been flown down from Cairns to Melbourne. So there are all of these flow-on effects. And the question in my mind is, as often as possible, when I can make sure when I can get my brain back from kind of going, the question in my mind is always, what's the benefit here? How do I make the most of this? How do I celebrate this? Where do I find the good things in this that we will want to keep after this is over? You know, how do we make sure that we keep the benefits of this as we move into a whole new paradigm? So for me, the understanding the astrology behind what's going on has been really helpful. And I just want to kind of, because I'm conscious of the time, I want to wrap up and open it up for questions, but I want to just finish off by saying I mentioned at the end of this year, we have Jupiter and Saturn together in at 1 degree of Aquarius. Jupiter is like the god of expansion, and the key with Jupiter is very optimistic. Jupiter's blue sky thinking, doesn't care how we get there. So Jupiter's almost like the opposite of Saturn. I like to say, if you think of the planets as being in charge of departments within your psyche, Saturn is in charge of logistics and how do we get from A to B. Jupiter is in charge of where do we want to go long term? What's the big dream? I don't care how we get there. That's not my job. That's Saturn's job to figure that out. What do I really want? How do I really want this to look? And it's tempting, especially in our culture, to try and plan from our Saturn perspective. And the problem with that is Saturn taps in psychologically, Saturn taps into how we've always done things and what we know. So this is going to be an invitation to say, by the end of this year, we really have this fantastic opportunity to tap into, collectively as well as personally, a sense of, if anything were possible, anything at all, what would we want that to look like? Because then we can sort of start reverse engineering it and use Saturn to come in and bring in the details of like, okay, I don't know the full story of how we get to that vision, but I know that the first steps on the path go in that direction and we can do that bit. So we can do the next little bit. So this is the invitation. So my invitation to people is to say, what are the fabulous things that are coming out of that? And what do I want to see even more of? And what things, because there are also going to be, you know, when with this Uranian Aquarian energy, there is that sense of, we can't even imagine all of it yet. We don't know. People are going to invent things and ways of doing things that we don't know yet, that we can't begin to imagine. But we can think about, you know, how do we want to feel? So we might want to feel that when you know, it's like the way I buy fair trade coffee. And the reason I buy fair trade coffee is I want to know when I'm making myself a pot of coffee that the farmer who grew it got paid properly. It's really simple. It's a really simple desire of mine to know that when I do things, nobody's being disadvantaged consciously by me. So that's one of the things that I'll be setting my intentions towards. It's like, okay, how can this be as fair as possible? Because, and the reason that all of this is formative is that in 2023, pardon me, we have Pluto himself, this deep transformation, moving into Aquarius, and he will be there until 2044. It's a really long time for Pluto to be in that sign, and it's going to be, this is sort of what we're talking about as the age of Aquarius. So the question becomes, what do I want to see for me personally and for us as a species by the time we get to 2044? You won't be able to imagine all the details. we just can't. There's too many changes coming. But yeah, so that's why when I think about it from these perspectives, I cannot help but be optimistic in the midst of this chaotic situation that my brain tells me is terrifying. It's a very interesting place to be personally. But I know that my higher brain function is the part that has the capacity to pull me through this, and I think the same is true of us as a species. So that's it. That's kind of the answer to the question, why am I not panicking? Well, why am I not panicking most of the time?
And I really want to acknowledge that, because sometimes I see you and I think, oh, Janet's so calm and collected and she's got all this wisdom. And I'm glad your brain is doing stuff.
Oh, God, absolutely. Yeah.
My high brain function is pretty good amidst all of this, but now and then we have these little freakouts because it's all uncertain. And so I love that you mentioned that astrology doesn't do stuff to us. It's more like the weather. And I think that's a really important takeaway. And the other one of like starting the day with the intention for delight, because I think we do get caught up, if you go on Facebook, it's quite gloomy, of course.
Yes. Yeah.
And justifiably so, but then that's where there's people like us, we have to make a conscious effort to sort of be showing people that it will be okay, and looking for these, opportunity to celebrate the good stuff that's coming out. And I'm really excited about the technology changes, and, necessity, as they say, is the mother of invention. There's some amazing things and Christy Lee's joined us, and she was on the concert yesterday, and she realized she'd been missing live music because she lives in a small town in Canada. And it's like,
oh, perfect.
So I know that even just these small things that we're doing are having a bigger impact than they would if we'd done them, 2 weeks ago even.
Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's been one of the things that I've just been blown away with, is the number of arts institutions, particularly arts and cultural institutions of all kinds, like from everything from live bands through to classical music and museums, and they're all finding ways to come online and do things. So the Met is live streaming opera recordings. I'm a bit iffy about, there are some operas I like, but it's not my thing all the time. But there are museums that have virtual tours, and I didn't know that. I didn't know
that either, and I've put it on my virtual care basket. Yeah. And Rachel messaged me yesterday, and she said, "Oh, look, you can do Netflix have introduced a Chrome extension where you can go and have a movie night with your friends and chat while you're watching it." Because I've tried to watch something with a friend in Canberra, and we can't get them to be at the same time. So it's like, virtual movie night. And I'm like, ooh, what could we watch in our PJs at home,
yeah,
our laptops or whatever. So I think it is actually very exciting. And thank you so much for sharing what you have. Just wondering if anyone wanted to comment or share or ask a question of Janet.
Can I just say, Janet, thank you so much. I absolutely adore listening to what you have to say about the stars and the world and everything. I have seen, I've got people in my world who are, the negative Nancy's, and they're the ones out stocking up on toilet paper and stuff, and I'm distancing them. But what I'm seeing is some incredible innovations and creativity around how people are approaching their business. approaching their mindset at this time as well. You know, it's very easy to get dragged into fear. But having been talking to you since last year about what this astrological major shift was going to happen, and we didn't know what it was.
No.
It's given me some comfort to know that this is actually part of a plan, and it's how we respond to that.
Yes, I think that's exactly it. It's like, and I mean, I don't think I would word it the same way. Like the being part of a plan implies that there's some kind of, you know, a star police in the sky that made this all up and is doing it to us. And so, but you know, I know how much, but I know how
the
much
weather conditions are set for transformation.
Yes. On the other hand, see, this is the advantage of being an astrologer, talking to somebody whose chart she has seen. I know how much Virgo you have in your chart, and for you, the concept of a plan is actually really soothing. For someone like me, I've got a much more rebellious streak, and it's like, don't tell me it's a plan. But yes, there is this idea that there is, I don't even like the word purpose. It's this opportunity. There's this moment in time that, you know, there's that wonderful, remember that those nerdy people like me will remember the scene in Lord of the Rings where Sam has his little monologue about how the people who are living through the big stories, they don't know that they're in the big story. They just know that they've got stuff to do, and they don't necessarily know how the story is going to end. And I think that's another thing we have to kind of face up to. I sometimes think that one of the things I love about this is it's one way that I can sort of stare into the apocalypse and say, not today. Not today. You are not freaking me out today, because A, it's not an apocalypse, it's just change, and B, I have to accept the fact that, you know, I mean, I look at the Pluto thing. By the time Pluto moves out of Aquarius and into Pisces, which is going to be another whole kind of amazing thing, but we haven't got time to talk about that today. It's going to be wonderful, by the way, but at that point, I don't know that I'll still be around. And when it moves out of Pisces and into Aries, which is going to be another big change, I definitely won't still be around, because that's like way, way, way off. And you know what? I have to be okay with that. And I think that's the nature of our, you know, our animal bodies see, our lizard brain sees our life as this kind of battle to stay living for the continuation of the species. Is this very biological, physiological driver. That's the part that's for many has been triggered into going and panic buying. And then there is this other part of us, which is the part that understands we are an eternal being that's having this physical experience. That part of us can happily sit back and go, this is interesting. I'm fascinated at what's happening within me. I'm fascinated at what's happening within the world. I'm looking to the future and going, oh, that's going to be really cool. And when I can tap into that, I have less need to feel like I have to know how the story ends. So, because I think that's, you know, I thought about this when my dad was dying. It's the nature of mortality, is that at some point, you know, nobody gets out of this alive. None of us. At some point, we're all going to die. And at that point, we're going to have to face up to the fact that we won't know what happens after we die. Well, we might. Depends on your belief system. I actually do think we'll know, but I don't think we care, to be honest. I think we return to some kind of non-physical thing, and I don't think we worry. I don't think you worry so much after death, but that's a completely different conversation. But I do think that there is this, if we can find within ourselves this idea of it's going to work out, and I might not know the end of the story, and that's okay. So,
and I really did like the bit where you said we are in the like in 200 years, they're going to look back and this is it. And we've looked back through history, and those people probably didn't know that we would be looking back at them. And I feel like this is an opportunity to really consciously choose how we're showing up in our world, because we don't want to infect people with too much lizard brainness, and just hearing that we have it and that we're working with it and understanding it. And like, it's like you can comfort that part of you. Oh, poor little lizard. You know,
Yeah.
I understand why you're upset and fearful. And then I want to be back up the Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Yeah.
you know, as much as I can, but just honoring that that is a natural expression of what we're going through as well, having that
Yes.
lizard brain response, but not letting that take us over and having riots in supermarkets or something.
Yeah. I always think it's a bit like, sometimes our lizard brain is like a panicky 3-year-old. You want to soothe it, but you're not going to take its advice.
No.
You know?
Yes. So it's like, yeah, and not in a condescending way, but
No.
you know, it's like,
No.
yeah, you're upset, you're afraid, you know, but
Yeah. You're upset and you're afraid, and it's fine. I've got this.
Yep.
I'm resilient and I'm resourceful, like we all are.
And
Yeah.
I think that this is the age of resourcefulness. And tomorrow we're talking with Liz O'Dwyer about sustainability in these new times. So I invite everyone to jump on tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, because this is like, we've all been talking about the environment, and now we have to think about the environment. So,
Well,
and not from, it's from a different place of global warming and all that. It's more based, as you said, on the Taurian resources and access to resources and how we transport those and all that. So I think it's brilliant for the environment.
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, you know, I'm careful about saying this in public because I know that people see it as me dismissing the seriousness and the impact on people and their loved ones. But I actually think one of the best things about this, it is like the planet saying, just sit down and think about what you're doing. So, you know, flights being restricted, cruise ships, which are the most toxic, they put out such filthy pollution, and they dump rubbish in the sea and all those sorts of things. They're not happening anymore overnight. So all of the things that people said we couldn't change, we've basically been told, you got to change it right now, this instant. And I think that there is something really powerful in this for us all. Because if nothing else, it gives us a taste of what it's like when we go back to perhaps a simpler way of doing things. I'm seeing so many people with stories of, you know, young mums coming into a store, there's no disposable nappies left, so older women are teaching them how to use a cloth nappy, demonstrating it for them on their children, or teaching them about it, or sharing that kind of information online. So when my little brothers were born, my mum very rarely used a disposable nappy because they were expensive and it seemed a waste of money. But they've become so ubiquitous that people, and my husband worked in childcare for 8 years, so I totally get the benefit of the disposable nappy. I don't, you know, want to put anyone down for using them. But at the same time, we are giving people an opportunity to say, I'm going to spend 3 months or whatever just using cloth nappies. Look at how much money I'm going to save. Look how much landfill I'm not creating. And it's this opportunity to kind of pause and take stock and regroup. I can't wait for Liz's thing. Seriously, for anyone who's listening to this, if you don't know Liz's work, she is one of the people who is going to be an absolute leader in this whole new Uranian Aquarian dynamic that we've got coming up. Really significantly important work. And what I love about Liz's work is that she brings it to the everyday. So like, I tend to think in these kind of big planetary cycles and global things and societal stuff, because that's the nature of how I see things. You know, it's why I spent a few years working in politics, and it's like, I love things on that big scale. What I love about Liz's work is that she says, this is how you do it day to day in your life. This is how you do the ordinary, everyday, grounded stuff. And that's really important. That's how you do it, how you get it done.
And we're even going to talk about toilet paper alternatives. So please join us. Yeah, Liz is amazing. So it'll be at 10 o'clock tomorrow on the same Zoom link. And did anyone else have anything else that they wanted to share? I think everyone's just blown away with what you've shared, and it's really contextualized, I think, what's going on. And Christy Lee said, I heard someone say it's also a break for the planet, like it's taking time to breathe, which is
absolutely
a beautiful idea, and it's actually happening. So Bye, Lisa. Have
way.
a good day at work. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I know you've got something on at 10, Janet. So
Yes.
I just want to thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I always find you such a calming but inspiring. It's like you're up in the planets and down on the ground at the same time.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for your time. And I just wish
so
everyone
welcome.
a beautiful day. And let's look for moments of delight today. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Ayesha. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Hi, this is Ayesha again. I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to subscribe and to check out the website virtualcarebasket.com. You can also find out more about me at ayeshahilton.com. Have a fabulous day.